Hello, welcome to another video from the conscientious biologist, Ben Gallagher. This one's the first in the playlist on body communication. This one looks at the nervous system. Now, if you think way back to when we did cell biology, and then again when we did evolution, we talked about the advantages of becoming multicellular organisms. If you're a single cell, unicellular organism, then you have to do absolutely everything for yourself. You have to make every single protein, to do every single metabolic reaction, and life is pretty hard. As soon as you can have more than one cell working together as a team, some of them can specialize to become one thing or another. They can share the workload and they can all mutually benefit. Now, the problem with multicellular organisms is once you've got lots of different types of cell and different parts of the body, they've got to be able to tell each other what they're doing so they can all coordinate for the benefit of the entire organism. So this playlist, Body Communication, looks at the two main mechanisms that organisms use to communicate between all the different cell types of their body. The first one is the nervous system that we're looking at here. The second one is the endocrine system that uses hormones, and we'll look at that in the second half of this playlist. This is from the GCSE syllabus, and as always, I'll ask that you please do like my channel, subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you. So I said a moment ago about cells in multicellular organisms having to create specialized cells to share the workload and do different jobs. So let's very quickly recap this concept of differentiation. Well, if I put up a standard animal cell here, that animal cell needs to make proteins to do everything it needs to do. That's such an important little statement, again, that I'm putting up there, that proteins do everything. Now, in this one original cell, because it's undifferentiated, and if it was unicellular, then it needs all of its DNA instructions to be open and available so the ribosomes can read them and they can express the genes into proteins so that the proteins can do everything. So all of the DNA in that original undifferentiated cell needs to be open so the cell can make all the proteins for doing everything. Now, if that cell's going to specialize into, for example, a neuron, which is what we're looking at now, but it could have specialized into a muscle cell or into a sperm cell or any of the other many forms of cells that are in a body, then they need to do something about their DNA. Now, what they do to specialize is that the DNA for the proteins they don't need in their specialized form must be turned off or forgotten about. It's the opposite to how humans learn, okay? We're born knowing nothing, and we have to gain our knowledge to become whatever specialized thing we're going to be, in my case, a biology teacher. For cells, as soon as that new cell is made, it's already got all of its information. It's like you being born, knowing absolutely every fact in the entire universe. Now, for a cell, it knows everything, because it's got the full set of DNA. For humans, all 46 chromosomes. But if it were to express every single protein, it wouldn't be specialized because it'd be doing everything. So what these cells above me need to do is turn off lots of the genes, lots of the DNA that they don't need, so they only end up making the proteins that are relevant for their specific function. Now, to turn DNA off is quite simple, because remember, DNA is made up of lots of bits of instructions. Each little instruction is called a gene. So each gene is kind of like the instructions that you'd get for a piece of flat pack furniture. So this set of instructions are how to make a bed. So think of like the bed being like the protein. This piece of paper would be like the DNA, the instructions for how to do that. Now, if you were a cell that didn't need to make that protein, the bed protein, you can turn that bit of DNA off simply by scrunching it up. If you screw that paper up into a ball, you can't read what's in it. If you take DNA and you scrunch it up, you can't read it there. So you prevent a cell from reading a bit of DNA and prevent it from making that protein by screwing up that bit of DNA. So if you were looking at the DNA in, let's say, a neuron, and you could look at the long strand of DNA, it might be that, well, that gene's needed, oh, that one isn't, that one, none of those are, scrunch them all up. That one's needed, that one's not, scrunch it up, that one is. And you can literally look at DNA if you've got a really powerful microscope, and you can see the scrunched up regions and the open regions ready to be read. Okay, so that's how these cells can specialize. So to be a specialized or differentiated cell, a large amount of the DNA has been turned off, and the proteins that are left perform the cell's specialist functions. Now we're going to be looking at this middle one, a neuron, and we're going to look at how that functions and how it's specialized to do its job. So let's look specifically at a neuron. And again, this is a slide from the cell biology playlist, the specialist cells one. So we're going to go through it quite fast. But nerve cells, their main job is to carry electrical impulses around the body. They're your communication cell that can work very, very rapidly because they send these very, very quick electrical impulses whizzing around your body from one place to another to carry that message. Okay, so to do that, they need to be very, very long, because that means they can reach one place to another place really, really quickly in one long connection. Okay, so if we took an ordinary cell, to make this long, let's get rid of the internal stuff. You'd literally need to kind of grab it and pull it and stretch it to make it very long. So that black line is still representing the membrane. This is still a cell, so it would be full of cytoplasm still. But look at a problem here now. The nucleus, if we were to put it onto this picture, the nucleus would be stuck right in the middle, causing a blockage for the electrical signal. Now that's not good. So what you need to do with nerve cells, they need to have somewhere that you can put the nucleus where there's space for the electrical signal to get around it. Now on this particular neuron, that space is created by it having a big spiky end. Okay. Now that means the nucleus can go in the middle there. But it's also really good that you've got this big spiky bit, because there's lots of branches that can gather information from various places. You've got all these signals that can arrive at the neuron from different parts of the body. Now, as well as having branching at that one end to receive lots of information, you can have branches at the other end as well to give information out to lots of places. So the second key adaptation of a neuron, and you're likely to be asked about the adaptations of a neuron or how a neuron is specialized, is that it's highly branched. That means it can gather information from lots of places and send it out to loads of places. So the branching is really, really important. The third adaptation is it's covered in these sort of bumps. Okay, these are actually a type of cell that wrap themselves around the neuron, but they create insulation. I think it's an electrical signal zooming along the cell. That signal could be lost out of the cell if the cell wasn't wrapped in insulation. Just like any piece of electrical wiring in your home, it's insulated by plastic or rubber to stop the electrical signal escaping. That insulation actually also helps the nerve impulse move even quicker, because the nerve impulse kind of jumps between those pockets of insulation, so it can go way, way, way faster. So three vital adaptations of a neuron. They're very, very long to carry the signal over long distances. They're branched to receive multiple bits of information and send it out to multiple places. And they're insulated so the electrical signal doesn't escape. Let's just label this up, because it is a cell and you will be asked to label cells in your exam. So as with any cell, we've got membrane, we've got cytoplasm, we've got the nucleus. I should also have drawn mitochondria and ribosomes and things in there, but I'm being lazy and I don't want to clutter the diagram. The big bit that houses the nucleus is always called the cell body. So you've got the entire cell, but the big bit with the nucleus is called the cell body. The bits, the branches that kind of feed into a nerve cell are called dendrites. The long bit that comes out is called the axon. The insulating layer is called the myelin sheath, or just myelin. That always seems to come up in the exam, so make sure you know what myelin is. And at the other end, you've got the axon branches to deliver that information. This is a really important slide. It's easy marks in the exam. It covers specialized cells from cell biology, cell structures, and it comes up in neurology, and it's about differentiation. So take a screenshot of this one and make sure you know this detail. So the remaining two slides in this presentation are trying to put together the whole nervous pathway. Now, what we mean by nervous pathway is the pathway that every single bit of nervous communication takes through your body. Every bit of information that comes to you goes through the exact same pathway to allow you to respond to whatever information you've received. Now that works by sending the signals along neurons, but there's more than one type of neuron, more than just that one we looked at in the last slide. But let's put that one up because it's familiar to you. So I've flipped it round because it fits better in my diagram this way, but that should be familiar to you from the last slide. This type of neuron is the motor neuron, and it's one of three different types of neuron. So let's look at how they fit together. The first type of neuron is this. It's called a sensory neuron. Now, sensory neurons still look very long, very thin. You've got axon branches at the one end, But note, you haven't got this big kind of bulky bit at the end here that's branched. So you need somewhere to put the nucleus. So look on that one. It's got that little bulgy bit out the side where the nucleus can go. So that little bulgy bit, just like we said for this other one, that little bulgy bit is the cell body. The cell body is just the bit that houses the nucleus. Now, just like the motor neuron, it needs to have insulation, so it's got these cells all along it. That is still called myelin. It still insulates the electrical signal. So this one's called the sensory neuron because sensory neurons are connected to your senses. Your senses are the way that you sense everything that's around you, how you receive the information. So right at the start of the sensory neuron, I'm going to put those little circles over there to represent a receptor cell of some kind. The receptor cell that's receiving information or sensing information in your senses. So it could be that that receptor cell is a cell in the retina at the back of your eye that's picking up on light right now from the screen that you're looking at, so you can see me and you can see the information on this screen. So that cell is receiving information and it's literally attached to the start of the sensory neuron. Now, information that gets received is called a stimulus. There's not many stimuli actually you are capable of detecting and receiving information on. We'll look at those in a minute. But when a stimuli does come along, like the light coming off your screen right now, it hits the receptor organ, stimulates it, and the receptor organ creates an electrical impulse. So that little star symbol I put there, that's the electrical impulse that's just been created by a stimulus of some kind hitting a receptor cell. Now that impulse, if you look on the sensory neuron, that impulse is going to travel along the sensory neuron, decide which axon branch it's going to go down, it's going to travel down it. That's going to take the signal to what we call the coordinator. You've got two main coordinators, your brain and your spine. We'll talk about what they each do in a minute. But they literally coordinate the information they're receiving from your sense organs or your receptors. Now, the neurons that make up your coordinators look like this, and they're called relay neurons. They're much shorter, but they've got loads and loads of branches. And remember, think about these pictures in 3D. That one would look like if you had a tennis ball, but your tweaked branches and points coming out of all sides of it. So it was highly spiked all over. That means it can receive information from all of those spikes, but it can also send information out through all of those spikes as well. So that's a relay neuron. So if the signal comes from the sensory neuron, it's going to jump that little gap to the relay neuron. Watch the relay neuron now. The electrical impulse is going to move down the coordinator. The relay neuron is going to decide where it goes, send it down one of the branches to the motor neuron it wants to connect to. So now you'll note that branch from the relay neuron is meeting that branch from the motor neuron, and the signal is going to jump that gap, and we're going to have our electrical impulse now traveling on down here until it gets to the very end where it stimulates an effector. An effector is the thing that does the effect, or in other words, it causes a response. So effectors are generally muscle cells, because most responses will be a movement, or they might be a secretion of a hormone, but that would still be muscles squeezing on a gland to release that hormone. But let's just talk about this as an example. It could be that I put my hand on something hot and I instantly feel on my hand, oh, that's really hot, so I pull my hand away quickly. Now what this pathway was is the stimulus was the hot object, the receptor was cells in my hand that could feel that heat. Signal went along a sensory neuron, went into my coordinator. The coordinator went, that's too hot, move your arm away. So it sends a signal back out down a motor neuron to my bicep muscle to twitch and pull my hand away. So the response was pull my hand away. And you think how quickly that would happen. If you touch a hot object, you literally touch it and you pull your hand away. So this pathway can go incredibly fast, but it's always the same pathway. So take a screenshot of this because this is really, really vital information. Then we're going to go on to sort of summarizing it and putting it in a more of a flow chart and putting some extra information on it. But take a screenshot of this one. Okay, so let's try and put all of this together now in one big screen. Okay, so let's put the nervous pathway up as a flow chart now. So you've got a stimulus. The stimulus is going to hit a receptor cell. The receptor cell is going to send a signal to your coordinator, which decides what to do. Your coordinator sends a signal back out to an effector, and your effector is going to cause a response. Now, that's the reflex pathway. So as an absolute bare minimum, make sure you've learnt those 5 terms in sequence. Let's put the neurons in place though. The sensory neuron connects the receptor and coordinator. The coordinators are made of relay neurons, and the motor neuron connects the coordinator to an effector. So that still really is pretty basic information. Let's break each one of those down though. Let's look at the stimuli that you can respond to. So you can respond to, because you can be aware of light waves, you can be aware of the wavelength, which determines the colours you can see, or the intensity, which determines the brightness. But you can detect light waves, that's how you see. You can also detect chemicals that are both in the air, but also in water and food. So you've got chemical detectors about you. You may not really have ever thought about this, that you are good at detecting chemicals, but you are. We'll talk about why in a minute. You can also detect heat, so radiation, infrared radiation. You can detect pressure or pushing, and you can detect sound waves. Now, the reason why you can detect those is because you have receptors for those. You have ears, skin, tongue, nose, and eyes. Pictures of 4 of those there, but of course all of them have got skin, so I didn't bother putting an extra picture of skin up. But let's link those receptors or receptor organs up to the stimuli that they can pick up on. Now, I've put these in order, so it should be obvious. Light waves can be picked up by the eye. Chemicals can be picked up by the nose and the tongue. If they're airborne chemicals, they're picked up by the tongue. We commonly refer to that as smell. So your nose smells things, but all that is chemicals that are in the air, hit cells inside your nose called olfactory cells, and those olfactory cells decide what that chemical is, and your brain interprets it as a smell. So smell is still chemical analysis. Your tongue is virtually the same. The cells on your tongue, your taste buds, are almost identical to the cells in your nose, but they can detect chemicals in things that go into your mouth, in water, in drinks, in liquids, in foods. Okay, so you can analyze the chemicals, and that's what taste is. Heat and pressure both get detected by the same receptor organ, which is the skin. Through your skin you can feel heat, you can also feel touch and pressure or pain if it's a hard pressure. And sound waves, of course, can be detected by the ears. So you've got all your main stimuli, you've got the receptor organs that link up to them. Your coordinator, as we said on the last slide, are your brain and your spine. Now, if you look at this diagram, you can see the brain in really quite bright white inside the skull, but look at still the bright white line that's coming down from under the brain. It goes down. That's your spinal cord. Your spinal cord is just an extension of your brain that goes down your back. So it kind of is still part of your brain. Those two together, the brain and the spine, are known as your central nervous system because they're at the center of everything. They coordinate it and they control everything. Now, they do different jobs though. Your brain is used for complex voluntary processing. Complex meaning it might need lots of things to be thought about, draw on other areas of the brain. It's really complex thing that you've got to put together. It's voluntary, so you deliberately want to do that processing in your head. But that complex voluntary processing we just commonly call thinking. Okay, so you use your brain for stuff that you have to think about and work out. Your spine is used for rapid involuntary processing. Involuntary meaning you don't choose to do it. It's an instant, rapid thing that you do without thinking about it. Like touching something hot and pulling your hand away. You don't put your hand on something hot and go, oh, that feels hot. I believe it's burning my skin. I had better move my hand away. Because by the time you've done that, your skin would be really badly burnt. Okay. Now, what we call those things, these rapid involuntary processing responses, are reflexes. So your spine deals with your reflexes. So your spine is far more simple, deals with rapid protective stuff. Okay. If we're looking at effectors, we're basically talking about muscles, as we said, but as well as muscles, we mentioned before, it could be glands, because one response could be the release of hormones, but still it's muscle squeezing on that gland to cause the release. So generally, the effect of almost anything you do is going to be a muscle. Even if it's, you know, a reflex one, for example, you look up at a bright light, the pupils in your eye will get smaller, they'll constrict to protect you, to stop too much light getting in your eye and blinding you. Now, you don't think about that. You don't look at a bright light and go, oh, that's hurting my eyes, I better close my pupils up a bit. they just go, they just shrink in. That's muscles in the iris of your eye pulling them closed. We'll deal with that in a couple of presentations time when we look at the eye. But it's still these rapid responses, if they're reflexes or complex processing, but they almost always result in muscles doing something to create the response. Okay, now everything that you ever do uses this pathway and allows you to effectively interact with your environment. Literally everything. You never do anything spontaneous. Everything you've ever done in your life has been in response to one of those fairly limited stimuli. Okay, now that's evolved as a protective mechanism because you need to react to danger. You need to work something out if it's about getting food, if it's about trying to create shelter and survive your abiotic environment. You're always responding to the stuff that's around you. So this nervous pathway is an absolutely essential part for our survival, which is why we've evolved this system. This slide kind of summarizes everything you need to know about the nervous pathway, so make sure you've taken a screenshot of this one, and that's pretty much it for this presentation. Okay, from here I want you to move on to body communication 2, which is on synaptic transmission. Now we said when we were looking at those sensory neuron, relay neuron, motor neuron, you remember I said it's got to jump that tiny gap. Those tiny gaps are part of a synapse. So we need to look at the mechanism behind how a signal can jump that gap. That's in the next presentation on synaptic transmission, and then we recap it all by looking at a reflex arc. As always, please do subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Give this video a like if you've enjoyed it and found it useful, and go ahead to my Facebook page to find some extra bits of biology that might help you out. Thank you.